I thought, considering your background, interest, and purpose, that I would go back in time a little bit first, and then let's go on from there to see what's happening now and in the future with regard to the internet and the things that are appendant to it. But let me go back in time to 1973. I'm at Stanford University. I'm a member of the faculty. My close colleague, Robert Kahn, has moved from a company called Bolt, Beranek & Newman to the Defense Department, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. We had both gotten to know each other during the period when the ARPANET was being built, one of the first large area packet switching systems ever constructed. And so he and I worked at UCLA testing the system to figure out whether its protocols were working the way they should. So in the spring of 1973, Bob came to Stanford University and announced that we had a problem. Of course, my first reaction was, what do you mean, we? And he said, well, the ARPANET was very, very successful. It showed that packet switching was a very good way of connecting multiple computers to each other of different types, different brands, from IBM and Digital Equipment Corporation, Hewlett-Packard, and so on. But, he said, the Defense Department is interested in command and control. And in particular, they're interested in using computers in order to manage military resources better. The theory at that time was that if you could manage your resources better than the other guy, a smaller force could overcome a bigger one. That term, that was called force multiplier. So I said, yes, but what's the problem? He says, well, if we're going to use computers in command and control, we're going to have to put them in ships at sea. We're going to have to put them in aircraft. We're going to have to put them in mobile vehicles. We had built the ARPANET out of dedicated telephone lines. Connecting the tanks with wire probably isn't going to work because they're going to run over the wires and they'll break. The airplanes won't make it off the ground and the ships will get all tangled up. So we had to build a packet-switched mobile radio system and a packet-switched satellite system in addition to the wireline ARPANET. And at this point, Bob said, now we have a problem. These packet-switched networks are not uniform. The packet radio network topology keeps changing depending on where the vehicles have gone. The ships at sea using satellite have a very different delay because of the synchronous satellite compared to a terrestrial system. The data rates were different, the packet sizes were different, and the error rates were different. So even though these were three different packet switch nets, they had very different characteristics. The problem we had was figuring out how to make it all look like one uniform thing. And that's where the TCP/IP protocols came from. It was a method of making disparate packet switch networks look like a uniform thing to all the devices connected on any of the networks. We made several important assumptions that led to the design. The first assumption was we can't change any of the existing networks. None of them knew that they were part of a multiple network system. They all thought they were the only network in the world. And so there was no way to say to the network you were connected to, please send this packet to another computer on a different network, because the networks didn't know that there was anything other than their own network. So we had to invent an internet addressing system. And so when ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, was mentioned earlier, its job, when it was created in 1998, was to oversee the allocation of IP address space. Some of you know that IP addresses used to be 32 bits long. Now they're also 128 bits long. We have IP version 4 and IP version 6. This is one of the things that we didn't quite get right. We ran out of IPv4 address space in 2011. But considering that we started in 1973 and that there were 4.3 billion terminations available in that initial design, you know, we did fairly well. But sometimes I wish that we'd done the IPv6 thing first so we didn't have to go through what is now a fairly difficult transition to bring IPv6 technology into the system in parallel with IPv4. But that's happening. It's about 30% penetrated on a global scale. There were two other technical things that I want you to keep in mind They set the stage for almost everything that has happened since the internet was turned on January 1st, 1983. The first thing is that we underspecified the network design, and I want to argue in favor of underspecification when you're doing something like this, especially when you're not sure what's going to happen, when you're not sure what new technologies are going to come along. So we started out with the idea that the packets at the internet protocol layer, like little electronic postcards, don't know, would not know, and would never know exactly how they were being carried. This is like a postcard that doesn't know whether it's going on a ship, an airplane, or a boat, or on the back of a bicycle. The internet packets actually don't know whether they're going over an optical fiber, a satellite radio link, a mobile radio link, or something else. They just don't know. And that was important because we knew that new technologies were going to come along that we didn't know about, and we wanted them to be useful for carrying internet packets. So that was the first thing. We made the packets stupid in that respect. We made them stupid in another respect, too. They had no idea what they're carrying. It's kind of like a postcard that doesn't know what you wrote on it. It has a to address and a from address and some content, but the postcard doesn't know what it's carrying. Only the recipient can interpret what's on the postcard. In the internet world, it's exactly the same. The internet packets only know they're carrying a little bag of bits from point A to point B with some probability greater than 0. That's all we ask of them. All the other work to make sure that all the packets get there, that they get there in the right order and everything else, is a higher layer of protocol which is implemented in the edge computers. So all of the intelligence in the system is at the edge. When you hear about cloud, and people think of that as somehow in the middle of the net, technically speaking, it's at the edge of the net. It's just a very big pile of computers sitting at the edge of the communication system. So I want you to keep that in mind because this openness was really important. New technologies have come along. We swept them into the network. When optical fiber became available, it just became another transport mechanism for the internet. When somebody said, gee, I think we want to carry video, we'll have to digitize it, they didn't have to change the internet, except maybe for increasing the bandwidths of the underlying transmission system. But the video and interpretation of video was done at the edges. The internet didn't know whether a packet had video, a piece of a web page, somebody's email, or something else. This flexibility and openness has allowed new applications to be developed on the internet that hadn't been anticipated before. So I want to overemphasize, if I can, how important the open network is. It's architecturally open. New protocols have been invented over the past 30 years. New applications have come along. When the World Wide Web came along, thanks to Tim Berners-Lee, the network didn't change. He put a new layer of protocol, the hypertext transport protocol, and a content description mechanism called HTML, hypertext markup language. But that sat on top of the internet. In fact, if the internet hadn't been there, Tim's invention might not really have gone very far. But he had a ready-made, globally accessible system to carry that, the web-based protocols to wherever those packets wanted to go. And so I'm sure all of you have watched as new applications have come out of the World Wide Web. Another technology which got started at the same time as the internet did, the mobile phone, started in 1973. A man named Marty Cooper developed the mobile phone, or began development for Motorola in 1973, and unknown to Bob Kahn and me. And in 1983, he turned on the first mobile phones for Motorola, the same year we turned the internet on. But we were kind of running in parallel universes until 2007, when Steve Jobs came along with the smartphone. It's a little hard to believe that the smartphone is only 10 years old, and look how dependent we have become on it. Yeah, I'll let you just contemplate the ramifications of rapid ingestion of technology and dependence on it. But the two technologies merged in 2007. Suddenly, the mobile phone became valuable because it got access to all the content and functionality of the internet. And the internet became more valuable because it was accessible through a mobile phone. So anywhere you could get a mobile phone signal, you could get access to the internet. Now, I realize that we're still kind of We're up to the present, but I wanted to emphasize one other thing that you may not know. When this work began at Stanford University, I had graduate students in my laboratory and visiting professors from France, from the UK, from Norway, from Japan. This was not a purely American initiative. This involved people interested in this technology from a number of places, even from India, by the way. One of my best graduate students, Yogan Dalal, has his name on the first detailed specification of the TCP protocol, along with my name and Carl Sunshine. So I want you to know that I appreciate that I had the help of people outside of the United States to help figure out how to make this thing work, to implement it. And some of you will know, and I won't go into the long history of the struggle between the Open Systems Interconnection Standard and the TCP/IP standard. Eventually, TCP/IP became the preferred and adopted technology for the internet, partly because we spent most of our time trying to make sure it worked, as opposed to documenting it in detail. Only after it worked did we finalize the documents. Frankly, I think that's a pretty good tactic, as opposed to writing everything down in detail that you don't know if it's going to work, adopting the standard, and then discovering that you got it wrong. So where are we today? About 3.5 billion people are online. It's about half the world's population. I have to tell you that our executive chairman, Eric Schmidt, announced that I wasn't allowed to retire because I'm only half done. I have 3.5 billion more people to convert as the chief internet evangelist. So here I'm still here working away. The second observation is that it's not uniformly accessible. And there are a number of different reasons for that. Some of them are economic. The cost of the equipment to get onto the network, the cost of use of the communications, the cost of the communications to use the network can inhibit people's ability to get access to it. And so the normal expectation is that the spread of the internet will follow a curve of reduced cost for equipment and for communication operation. And as we get to places where incomes on the average, disposable incomes are lower, then they will get on when it's affordable. Of course, even if they can afford it, it's not clear that they'll want to get on unless there's something useful you can do with it. And so if I've learned any other lessons in the course of the last 30 years or so, it is that with systems like this, you'd better make sure that there is content that people can use in the languages that they speak. That does raise a very interesting other problem. There are parts of the world that have, let's say, reduced literacy. And so, of course, the solution to that is better education. But there is another intermediate step, and that's to deal with spoken communication as opposed to written communication. And so you'll see, certainly from Google and others, that there's an increased attention paid to being able to interact with computers on the network using spoken interactions to speak questions and get spoken answers back or visuals back concurrently. So the internet's utility is becoming increasingly valuable as we introduce some of these artificial intelligence mechanisms into the system. So one of the things that Google is very proud of is that over the course of the last decade or so, we have been able to learn how to translate from one language to another. That too is a way of breaking down barriers to communication and offering people access to content that otherwise would be inaccessible because of the language barrier. Now, I have to tell you that our translations are not perfect. They've gotten better over time, and recently we've introduced some multi-layer neural network technology to improve the quality of our translations. But one of my favorite stories is being in Heidelberg, which is where I'm headed tomorrow afternoon for the Heidelberg Laureate Forum. And I was making a presentation about the internet to my colleagues there, and I wanted to show them what the translation looked like. And so I pulled up the weather report for Heidelberg. And of course, since I was in Germany, it came up in German. And then it translated it. And it translated it so quickly, I actually didn't realize that this was a German website. So I'm looking at the predictions for the weather. It said that there wasn't going to be any rain and that there would be sunshine. and it said there was a 0 probability of ice cream. So I took a screenshot of that, you know, and I went over to my German colleagues and says, "You guys have ice cream storms here?" And of course, it was ice, E-I-S, which is a term that can be interpreted as ice cream, but it can also be interpreted as hail. And I kept that and sent it to my language translation colleagues here, saying, you know, this is a pretty interesting phenomenon. And they said, yeah, we didn't have enough context to figure out that it was really, ice, not ice cream. So where are we today? Well, we have a lot of people online. We have a lot of people inventing new ways to use the network. We also have succeeded in dropping the barrier for access to information and the generation of information and the sharing of information to practically 0, and in particular, the barrier to sharing information broadly. In years past, if you wanted to share something you knew in a very broad way, you needed to own a television station, a radio broadcasting station, a printing press, or something. These were all mass media, and not very many people had access to those media to share what they knew. Internet has dropped that barrier to practically 0. Now, that has its good side, and it has its not so good side. The good side is people with useful information can share it freely, and they do. In fact, I will confess to you that when the World Wide Web finally blossomed around mid-1990s, around 1995, when Netscape Communications went public and the stock went through the roof and everybody got excited, that there was this outpouring of content. People with information that they thought might be useful to others just actively poured this into the network. In fact, there was so much information there that nobody could find anything, which motivated the development of search engines, among which Google is one. However, there was nothing about the quality of the information that the technology didn't know. Remember back to the stupid network, the packets don't know what they're carrying, the websites don't know what they have on board. So the result is that there is this enormous amount of information whose quality varies dramatically. And the question is what to do about that. It's always been my belief that this enormous collection of content that we now all have access to puts a burden on us as individuals to think about what information we're seeing, where did it come from, what is its origin, who is making what assertions about what. And in a way, it isn't new. Some people say, oh God, this is the 21st century information overload. I have news for you. The information overload has been with us for a long time, way before the internet. Think about all the movies that are made, the radio programs that are broadcast, the television shows that happen, the books and the magazines and the newspapers that are published. I will bet good money that not one of you has read every magazine and every newspaper and seen every movie and listened to every broadcast that's happened. So you already learned to filter stuff. You chose what you wanted to look at. And I hope, as a matter of normal practice, you thought about, where did this information come from and should I take it on board or reject it? That's called critical thinking. And if there is any one gift that I would want our children to have, it's to learn how to think critically about what they see and hear. Because they're going to get good information and not so good information from magazines, newspapers, televisions, radio, movies, their friends and their parents. So I think that we are now faced with a really interesting conundrum. We've achieved a kind of 0 barrier for the sharing of content. Now we have to learn how to help people distinguish what's good content from not so good content. And that's a job that is not going to be done purely by technology. That's a job that's done with the wetware up here. And so we have a responsibility to introduce that notion to our young people who will grow up in this environment and absolutely will need more than we ever did the ability to distinguish good content from bad. So I'm going to stop there because I have the feeling that maybe you have questions. I'll guarantee you, as an old former Stanford professor, if you have no questions, I'm fully capable of going on for another 20 or 30 minutes, even if I don't know anything about the topic. So let me stop there. Do I have time for questions?
It's 3 o'clock, though, so do you have your next?
Say again?
It's 3 o'clock, so you have
Oh, man, I just blew the whole, we have 15 minutes?
I think you have 15 minutes.
Yay, all right. So do you want to do Q&A? Do you want to do Q&A?
All right, we'll take a few questions.
You know, by the way, Q&A makes it sound like you have all the questions and I have all the answers. Don't believe that. Go ahead.
So thank you very much, first of all, for the nice presentation, and in particular the last remark which you said about that Google is supposed to be a platform for information and that we have to be critical with how we evaluate that. But on the other hand, my question is like, what is kind of Google doing to maybe also avoid the spread of crime and terrorism and things like that? I mean, the thing is, you want to be neutral, right? You don't want to judge because it's, how can I say it? It's a little bit critical, right? But I mean, for example...
No, this is question number 102, right? 101 is, did you ever know the internet was going to get this big? 102 now is, you know, what do we do about bad content?
Because I would try to kind of really abandon that. I would, but I guess it's not really possible to...
No, well, let's talk about this. First observation I want to make is that the internet is a mirror of the society that we live in, or the societies, plural. So the content of the internet, content of the World Wide Web reflects what people care about, are interested in, wish to share. If you don't like what you see in the mirror, fixing the mirror doesn't do you any good at all. You have to fix what's reflected in the mirror. So this is a really tough challenge, right? This is a societal challenge. I'm not saying that there is no technology that can help. In fact, certain kinds of speech the technology can deal with, but in particular malware, phishing, and this sort of, let's see, we have phishing and malware in particular, and spam are things that we can recognize algorithmically. Not perfectly, but often algorithmically. And the reason that that's possible is that there is so much content going through the Google email system that we can see when there's large quantities of the same thing showing up in a whole bunch of different emails. So we can recognize that that's probably spam. Sometimes the actual text of the messages imply, you know, this, you've won $60 billion, please send money to so-and-so, or the Nigerian thing and all that other stuff. So sometimes we have enough examples that will allow the software to say this is likely to be classified as spam. If it's malware, sometimes we have enough information about the actual software itself, the bad software, to recognize a signature of that software and say this thing likely contains a malware attachment. So sometimes we can deal with that. The problem that we face, and you see this in the headlines all the time, is that the algorithms are rarely perfect. And it will either sometimes give you false positives, like this is something that shouldn't be on the algorithm says we should exclude this, and later it turns out it was a very legitimate website that was trying to discuss the issue of terrorism, not promote terrorism, and yet the algorithm couldn't tell the difference. So there are things like that that are at issue. The second problem is scale. The amount of content flowing through the net is almost incalculable. The number of hours of video uploaded to YouTube, surely you've all heard this, is 400 hours per minute of video is flowing per minute. 400 hours per minute is flowing into the YouTube system. Probably we would hear similar statistics for Facebook and others. So we can't really deal with that by assigning a human being to review 400 hours of video. So what do we do? Well, there are certain kinds of abuses that we can try to deal with. For example, copyright material, if it's been identified, can have a digital signature. And so we do this, for example, in the case of YouTube, there's often music which is used to go with the videos. And if somebody tells us, wait a minute, that piece of music is copyright, and if we then run a digital thumbprint algorithm on this, so if that music shows up again, we can actually detect that that's one of the copyright pieces of music, and we send a note to the YouTube upload person saying, you can't put that up there because it's copyright. I do have an example of where I got burned by this. It wasn't music. It was in 2013. I'm in the UK. I have just received the Queen Elizabeth Medal for engineering. And in the course of the lectures that we gave, one of the lecturers, not me, had put up a little clip from the International Olympics, which had been held the year before in the UK. And it was bicycle riders who were at an angle, and he was trying to explain the physics of that. You know, why didn't the bicycle riders fall over? So he put this little clip up. I had agreed to take 90 minutes of the lectures and put them up on YouTube, because I had access to that. So I put them all up, and like 2 minutes later, I got a note saying, your video has just been taken down for copyright violation by the internet, by the International Olympics Committee. So, you know, a few bad words occurred to me right about then. And so fortunately, since I was sort of an insider, I got a hold of the YouTube guys and says, what's this? And they said, well, you should simply protest. You should lodge a complaint or an appeal, lodge an appeal. And then we'll put it back up until the appeal has been resolved. So I lodged my appeal, and they put the video back up. And sure enough, within a couple of days, the International Olympic Committee said, oh, it's for educational purposes. Fine, we don't have a problem with that. But the system was pretty fast in its detection using these kinds of thumbprints. But that only works if you already have a digital signature that tells you that something has already been tagged as copyright, for example. So I don't want to go too much on and on here, but I want to emphasize, first of all, that we at Google and others, I'm sure, are fully aware of how hard this problem is and how important it is to try to cope with. But I would like for you, especially if you're in the policy side of things, to recognize that this is not a simple matter, and that it's very important not to end up having the private sector dictate what people can and can't say. I really am very nervous about that. We were put into a similar situation when the right to be forgotten matter was put on the table by the European Court of Justice, with very little guidance as to what we should or should not reject or erase from the net. We've tried to respond to that, but it makes a private sector company very nervous to be in that position. There is one other aspect of this that I'm, as a technical person, as an engineer, I'm always puzzled by. With regard to the right to be forgotten, think about what we have to do. We have to remember everything we're supposed to forget, because the only way we can take it out of the index is to remember that we're supposed to do that. And so when somebody says, take this out, we make a note over here. This note keeps getting longer and longer over time because you don't know if it might come back, so you have to keep remembering. So, you know, technically speaking, some of these things lead to unanticipated or maybe unintended consequences. So that's a very long way of saying we care a lot about this problem. But I believe, let me speak personally now, this is not a Google position, I believe that the solutions to these problems are not technical alone. I think we have real societal questions to answer. Why do we see this kind of behavior? Why are they motivated to do that? And just to give you a homework assignment with regard to terrorism in particular, I would like to draw your attention to a book by Louise Richardson, who is the current Vice Chancellor of Oxford and former Vice Chancellor of St. Andrews University in Scotland. Louise Richardson wrote a book in 2006 called What Terrorists Want. I urge you to read that because it's a much more rational take on the problems that we face than oh, these people must be crazy. They're not. They're motivated, but they're not crazy. Some of them might be, but then so are some of you and me too. But the fact is, you really need to understand societally what's going on in order to figure out responses to this. They're not purely technical. Okay, wow, that was a big, long answer. Who's got another question? I see hands up all over everywhere.
Time for one more question.
All right, go for it.
Actually, my question, thank you very much, was very technical, maybe
Yeah.
more technical. Do you see a future for TCP/IP, or do you see something else replacing it for the future of our information content and
So
overload?
this is fascinating. This is not a plant, okay, as far as I know. So the answer is, it's been around for a long time. It's amazing that it has scaled by a factor of 10 million in terms of the size of the system, the speeds that are involved, the relative delays and everything else. However, at Google, we invented another thing called QUIC, Q-U-I-C. It's an acronym, and I don't remember what it stands for. But what it does is collapse the TCP protocol and the TLS, this is the security protocol, into one protocol. And why would we do that? Well, it takes time to recover if a secured TCP connection is broken. A bunch of exchanges have to go back and forth to generate keys and to regenerate the cryptographic channels. The QUIC protocol just does it faster with fewer packets. It's very attractive. There are a few other features of it that are good too. And you know what? I don't mind. You know, it's not like, oh my God, they took my protocol and it's dead. In fact, just to show you that I actually don't mind that people make advances on these things, there's an interplanetary extension of the internet. Some of you will have heard about that. It's in operation now between Earth, Mars, and the International Space Station. And we tried to use TCP in the design, and about half an hour into the design, we realized that's not going to work. The speed of light was too slow. and so the round trip times between Earth and Mars could be as much as 40 minutes. The flow control in the TCP system was not designed for a 40-minute round trip time. And there were a few other little problems too. So we invented a new suite of protocols to do that. And they ride on top of everything, including internet. So the answer is, this thing is going to keep evolving. We should encourage that. The new applications and transport systems that are available invite this kind of creativity. And you should too. Okay, is that really all the time we've got? Ah!
I'm going to be in big trouble because your call's at 3:15. But please join me in thanking Vint.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Cheers.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. It's a